Hey guys, Dark Skeleton here once again, and today I'm going to be showing you a level 1 basic free-to-play Druid deck that every single player has access to these cards, and you can make this deck as soon as you unlock the Druid class by beating the Innkeeper as we did in the previous videos. So here you see the entire complete deck list of every single card that we have in the deck, and I'll go from top to bottom describing each card and why we have it in there. So to get things started, first off we have Innervate, which is considered to be a very core Druid card. It allows you to basically cheat inside the game by giving you 2 extra mana for the turn you play it on. This means if you play it on turn 5, you might be able to bring out a turn 7 minion, getting you a huge board presence, a big advantage. It does cost you an extra card, but often the advantage you get on the board for it, it's just overwhelming for your opponent. Sometimes people just won't be able to deal with it, and at that point you can just keep playing more and more big minions and finish the game off. Claw is a very cheap Druid card. It is very good for removing early game minions. It gives your hero 2 attack and 2 armor, which makes it great for bashing 3/2s that a player might play on turn 2 for 2 mana, such as a Crazed Alchemist, which is actually a 2/2, or a Knife Juggler, which is the ideal target for that card. It's a 3/2 where any minion that gets summoned, the Knife Juggler chucks a knife at a random enemy. It's a card you want to remove. So Mark of the Wild is a card I almost considered not having any in the deck, despite there only being 5 different kinds of spells that you can get as a level 1 Druid. However, I felt that having 1 in there might be good just in case. 2 might be a little bit overkill. It's a card that has some great synergy with cards you can get later on, but the reason it's in here is just in case you need to buff another minion in a similar fashion as you would Shattered Sun Cleric so that you can get a favorable trade. If you can't get that trade on the turn you play the Mark of the Wild, I don't really recommend playing it, because if you buff a minion up and then it gets removed by your opponent for 1 card, then that puts you at a card disadvantage. But if you can destroy a minion by giving it an extra 2 attack and 2 mana, 2 attack and 2 health, while keeping your minion on the field, then Mark of the Wild can be quite strong. Wild Growth is the second of the Druid cheating cards as far as mana goes. It gives you an extra mana crystal permanently, which means every turn from now on you're going to have 1 extra mana. This card is perfect if you play it on turn 2, and even very good if you play it on turn 3. The downside is, as the game progresses, it gets weaker and weaker. So if you have it when you're at turn 8 or 9, where there's only a couple more turns left before you have max crystals anyway, you can just save it till turn 10, and when you play it on turn 10, it instead gives you an extra card that lets you draw an extra card called Extra Mana, something like that. So if you have it really late in the game, just save it till turn 10 and use it for extra card draw. Acidic Swamp Ooze. I talked about this one in the Mage deck. It is a very powerful card. Even in some pro decks you will see this. It destroys your opponent's weapon outright, and this can be very powerful against certain classes like, say, Warrior, who use a ton of weapons, especially the Gore Howl, which is an absolute minion destroyer. A Paladin's True Silver Champion, which is a very strong card that also heals the Paladin up. Or a Shaman's Doom Hammer, which is a weapon that allows the hero to attack twice. Anyway, if you can destroy any of those weapons with an Acidic Swamp Ooze, it's great. And the 3/2 stats on a 2-drop are standard to begin with. The Battle Cry is just extra icing on the cake. It's a great card. Next we have Novice Engineer. The reason I have Novice Engineer in the deck is twofold. One is because since this deck has cards that let you get to the late game faster, like Wild Growth and Innervate, we're going to focus this deck to be something of what's called a Ramp Druid, which is a Druid that tries to get to the late game, and then most of their deck, or a lot of their deck, is very late game cards, high cost minions, and then they just overwhelm their opponent by having high cost minions, and hoping that that'll overwhelm the opponent's board of low cost minions. So the other reason, of course, is the card draw allows you to basically cycle through your deck. This deck gives up the early game so that you can have a strong late game. So just putting down a 1/1 on the board, it's whatever. It might stall your opponent out a turn, but it lets you cycle, get into your bigger cards like your Boulder Fist Ogres, your Stormwind Champions, and throw something on the field. We're not so worried about the early game. Wild Growth will bring us into the late game, so we just want to stall until then. That's the whole idea of this deck. Next up we have Razorfin Hunter. It's a 2/3 for 3 that also summons a 1/1 boar. This is a pretty good card because if you combine the stats of the 1/1 boar with the 2/3 of the Razorfin Hunter itself, that comes out to 3 attack and 4 health for 3 mana, making it a pretty solid value card. Not much else to say beyond that, but sometimes having 2 minions is better than 1. Also, sometimes having 2 minions is worse than 1, especially against AoE effects. Shattered Sun Cleric. Similar to Razorfin Hunter, it's a value card. The reason I included it in this deck is if you take a look at the mana curve, with just Razorfin Hunter in there, the 3s were very weak, and you want to have more than 2 3s in just about any deck. So I put 2 of those in there. Gives a friendly minion +1/+1. Kind of fills the same purpose as a Mark of the Wild by buffing your minions up so that it can take out your opponent's minions and might even be able to survive the conflict. Beyond that, it's a 3/2 on its own, which is okay stats, but the real power from it is the battle cry. Makes it a good value card. Now, speaking of value, Chillwind Yeti is the definition of the value card, or the classic value card anyway. It is a 4/5 for 4 mana, which is very good stats. It's got a good distribution of stats, and it's hard for certain classes like priests to deal with because 4 is a very tough attack number to get around. It can clear a lot of early game minions. It's immune to Shadow Word Pain, destroys any minion with 3 or less attack. Immune to Shadow Word Death, destroys any minion with 5 or more attack. And overall, it's just very likely to make 2-for-1 trades, meaning it'll kill 2 minions before it dies. Gnomish Inventor. This is the higher cost version of the Novice Engineer, allowing you to draw cards, cycle through that deck, draw into all the lower late game cards that I'm going to get into in a minute. And as far as stats go, the stats are pretty poor, but they had to make the stats poor because drawing a card is very powerful. This puts the total card draw in the deck up to 4, and more than that if you count Wild Growth, which it's very possible you'll have on turn 10, and you'll be able to cycle another card from that, drawing into a better card that you can play. Which should keep this deck going into a reasonably late game match. Beyond that, we have Sinjin's Shieldmaster, or Shieldmaster, to be precise. This is a very staple minion, kind of like Chillwind Yeti. What it has over Chillwind Yeti is that it has Taunt. Your opponents are forced to attack into this minion, and since it has 3 attack, it is very good at destroying 1 or 2 cost minions, and even some 3 cost minions, which makes it a very solid pick. The only downside is it has 1 less attack, but in many decks, the Taunt is worth losing the attack. In this deck, we just take both of them because they're great minions. Next up, we have Darkscale Healer. Essentially, it's Yeti with a Battle Cry effect, and the Battle Cry effect is one I'm a big fan of. It restores 2 health to all friendly characters, and that includes your own hero. In a deck that's trying to go late game, this is a pretty strong effect. If you have any minions on the board, bam, they're healed up and they might be able to get an extra minion without dying, which is very good. Or bam, you play Darkscale Healer, it heals your own hero back up, and the opponent who's been trying to rush you down is going to have to go through slightly more HP in order to kill you. And 1 or 2 damage really can make the difference in many games. Next up, we have Kurabashi Berserker. This is a card which wouldn't be run in many standard Druid decks, though out of the basic cards we have to choose from, it's not a bad choice. Whenever this minion takes damage, it gains 3 attack. This means any amount of damage that comes into it, it's going to gain 3 attack, making it stronger and stronger and stronger. Combined with a Mark of the Wild to give it more HP or a Darkscale Healer to bring it back up to full, it can be a huge threat. If this thing stays around more than 1 or 2 turns, it's going to get very big and very powerful, and then your opponent is going to be forced to respond to it or die. It is not a bad card under any circumstances. The weakness of it, would probably be something like a Stampeding Kodo, destroying any minion with 2 or less attack. Its base attack is very low, but it does get strong later on. And as for the late game cards, we have Boulder Fist Ogre, a very solid pick. You notice its attack and health distribution is similar to a Yeti. That's good, having slightly more HP than it does attack. 6 attack, 7 health for 6 mana is very good stats. And overall, it's a solid pick. It almost certainly will get 2, maybe even 3 minions from their side of the field without dying unless it's responded to by something like a polymorph or some other kind of removal. Next up, we have Stormwind Champion. If you're able to control the board with your big cost minions that have a lot of HP, like is intended, then Stormwind Champion, when played on top of that, will give all of your minions a +1/+1 buff. This will make your minions have even more value, and Stormwind Champion will be the enemy's next target that they have to get rid of. If a Stormwind Champion lasts on the board with too many minions hanging around, and that Stormwind Champion is not removed, that could be called a win condition of sorts, because that is really tough to deal with. And lastly, we have 1 War Golem. I threw this in here because it is the late game cards that are available to us. It is an alright minion. It has 7 attack, 7 HP for 7 cost. In general, Boulder Fist Ogre is better than this, but we already have 2 of those in here, so this is there in addition. This just kind of seals the deal, making it a late game deck with a lot of high cost minions. A 7/7 will get trades, more than likely, so it's quite a powerful card. But for its mana cost, there are better cards in the game, but it will definitely get you started. So anyway, there you go. The general strategy of this deck, as I mentioned earlier, is to ramp up to the late game, kind of playing that ramp Druid strategy where you play a Wild Growth as soon as you can if you get it on turn 2, 3, and I would say even 4. After that, I would say it's not worth it and you should just save it for card draw. If your opponent's quite aggressive in the early game, try to draw into Claw in your opening hands, and you can use Claw and your hero power to deal 2 or 3 damage to any enemy minion on the field. This will be very good at keeping you from being overwhelmed before you get your big guys out. Once you start to hit 4 mana crystals, whether that's turn 4 or you just hit it from a Wild Growth a little bit early, you'll start to have cards like Chillwind Yeti and Sinjin Shieldmaster, which will just dominate most of the weak, low-cost minions. And from there, you can heal your guys back up with a Darkscale Healer, or drop something big and threatening like a Gurubashi Berserker or Boulder Fist Ogre. So, there you go. If you have any questions about this deck, comments, or maybe suggestions on how this could be a little bit better, there's not a huge pool of cards to choose from at level 1, but there is some room for debate, such as cards like Innervate, Mark of the Wild, or over here you can even see Healing Touch, something that you could consider throwing it in, but I just felt more minions was the way to go. So, yeah, if you have any comments about that, questions, just let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching, and I hope you found this useful. Next we'll get into the other basic decks. Thank you, bye.